God bless you. It's great to be with you. We're sharing a story today about Sunday morning. I think you like Sunday morning stories since you're experiencing one. That's the way it goes. This is a story about Sunday morning. A man was out partying really pretty hard, hooting with the owls and all kind of stuff on a Saturday night, and he came into church. He was really tired, really sleepy. And as he sat down in the church and the music was over and the sermon started, it seemed like that sermon was just so long and boring. I know that never happens here, does it? Not at all. It doesn't happen here. Well, anyway, it finally got so long and so boring, the man nodded off. And the preacher had been watching him. He'd been watching his head bob, and it was kind of upsetting the preacher a little bit. And finally, when the man nodded off, he did this. The preacher looked out at the congregation and says, I want everyone here who would like a place in heaven to stand up. And, of course, everybody in the congregation stood up except the man who was sleeping. And he says, okay, quietly sit back down. And then he looked around and he said, and everyone who wants a place in hell, please stand up. Well, that jerked the man, startled him awake. And of course, he didn't hear the first part, so he stood right up and he looked around and goes, well, I don't know what we're all voting on, but it looks like me and the preacher, the only ones who are standing up for it. And that's something we need to know. See, sometimes we wish we were invisible. We wish we were invisible when we seem to be the only ones standing up for something. Well, hopefully the thing that we're standing up for is something is right in God's eyes. See, taking a stand may include deciding or charting a course that is unpopular, and it leaves you feeling like you're all alone. Like you're all what? Alone, that's right. See, but you're not. You see, the psalmist writes to us in Psalm 139, and I hope these are verses that you will equip yourselves with. For at some point in time, you, your friends, your family members are going to feel like you're all alone with whatever's going on in your life. And so do this. Put this in your tool bag and in your arsenal, in your quiver, whatever, to help people in the difficult times. Psalm 139, beginning at the 7th verse from the New International Version. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. Folks, you're not alone. And therefore, keep this biblical principle in mind in everything you do. We're going to say this together really, really loudly. Right? Right. And that is, invisible God may be. Invincible God is. You just keep saying that to yourself over and over and over, and remember that principle. You may not see God working, but God is working. God is invincible. This principle illustrates how God works in the world. We've been sharing this verse for the last 4 weeks. This is Romans 8:28 from the Revised Standard Version. I hope you've memorized it by now. If not, please make it a point to do so today. We know that in everything, God works for good with those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. That's Romans 8:28 from the Revised Standard Version. Now, the book of Esther is a testimony to the truth of this biblical principle, that God works for good in all things with those who love him and are called according to purpose. Not necessarily for you, but with you. Let me set the Esther story thus far, if you will. There's a few main characters I want to remind us of. That is, there's a king named Xerxes, that's right, and there's a queen named Esther, absolutely. That Esther has a cousin/guardian named Mordecai, right? And then the king, in our last message, the king elevated one of his nobles to the highest noble status in the land. Matter of fact, the king made a law that everyone in the kingdom should pay honor to a man named Haman, right? That's Haman. So we got it. See, and folks, there it went. Haman left the gate of the king, and there's Mordecai at the gate, and everybody else bows down, but not Mordecai. And this really irritated him, and Haman wouldn't show honor to, Mordecai wouldn't show honor to Haman, and therefore Haman was angry. He wanted to get back not just at Mordecai, but everybody who was like Mordecai, all of Mordecai's people, if you will. In fact, as we're going on here, we're going to find out that Mordecai and Esther were of the certain people that Haman convinced the king to authorize the killing of these people on one specific day. Mordecai and Esther were those kinds of people. And they had hidden that fact for 8+ years from the king. So let's go now into our Esther story, Esther chapter 4. And we're going to do the 15th to the 17th verse. I know we did those in our previous message, but this just helps us maintain the continuity. Esther 4, 15 to 17. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So when we think about this, what was Esther worried about? The king was her husband, right? Well, go back to the beginning of the story. Xerxes had already dethroned one queen for just disobeying one order to show up at a party. And now here we have Esther, who not only is going to show up at a party, she's going to show up in violation of the law. She's going to show up uninvited at the king's throne room door. And that offense alone is punishable by death. By death. No biggie, right? You probably make bigger decisions than that before breakfast. Not. This is a really, really big deal. And the other thing is, from the beginning of this story, we saw that Esther was a very obedient girl, wasn't she? She did whatever cousin/guardian Mordecai told her to do. When she got into the harem of the king, she did whatever the eunuch who was in charge told her to do. She'd always been obedient. But now, after 8 years as the queen, she's starting to be a little rebellious. She is. And we're thinking about that. She's acting all queenly now. It's because she commands, not asks, she commands Mordecai to have all the Jews in Susa fast for 3 days. And then she just went ahead and stated that all her attendants would do the same. See, now Esther teaches us something that's very, very important to our Christian life, to living a life as a Christ follower. Something about making big decisions, right? When we make big decisions, we need to get our group on. Before Esther made a big decision about going to the king, she got her group on. Now, I've been told that I have to be careful about this because there's some kind of a coupon thing called Groupon. I'm not talking about coupons. I'm talking about getting your group, a people of like-minded Christians studying something encouraging for life, on. So should you and I. And I want to announce that we're beginning on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, we're beginning a study of 1st and 2nd Peter here at 6:30 p.m. Now, this will be a little more in-depth Bible study. We have a survey of Matthew going on Thursday nights out in the community in a home. So this one's going to be here at the facility Tuesday night, beginning at 6:30. Bring your Bible, and we're going to dig into the meaning behind the words, the context, the history, all that kind of stuff. It'll be a great time. So just think about and doing that. But the Thursday study on Matthew will continue. And if you need more information on that, just let me know. Okay? So here's what we need to know about fasting. Fasting doesn't change God, does it? Not at all. Fasting changes you. It changes me. See, while you're fasting, you can't eat or drink, but you can think, can't you? See, when you take this season of Lent that we're in, and you're giving up something, you're giving up chocolate or donuts or coffee or soda or whatever you chose to give up. The idea is that whatever time you would have spent partaking in that, you would then give that time to thoughts and thinking and following the Lord. As you get to more closely to the Lord. See, when you slow down enough to think, to ponder, to reflect, that provides God a much bigger opportunity. A much bigger what? Opportunity, absolutely. To nudge you towards the right direction, to making the right decision. See, the biggest journey begins with a single step. What's it begin with? A single step. Esther took this first step when she resolutely set out to go before the king. You know, this is kind of a little bit like the story of Jesus. Jesus once set out resolutely to do something on his own. He took his first steps towards dying at the cross resolutely. I want to read you to Luke, from the Gospel of Luke. And this is Luke 9, verse 51. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And how did Jesus get his group on? Well, in the Gospel of Luke, this story comes before he says these words. In other Gospels, it's placed differently. And if you want to know why they're rearranged, come and see me. We'll talk about the Easter mind and the story things. But the idea here is, just previous to this, Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration. And he took up his big three disciples. And who are the big three disciples? You should know this, right? Peter, James, and John, right? So they went up there with him, but it wasn't Jesus and his big three disciples sitting on the mountaintop. Someone else showed up. That's right. Moses and Elijah showed up to strengthen and to encourage Jesus for the rest of his journey. And then God came in a cloud, and they heard God's voice speak. And what did God's voice say? It said, "This is my son. Listen to him." And you and I should. We should listen to him, because life is a lot more like a journey than it is a single event. We're in the Christian season of Lent. And Jesus says we're to take up our cross and follow him. In one place, he even says to follow him daily. So learn from Esther. Learn from Jesus to get your group on. Right? To get a group of people around you, especially when you're making big decisions, but all the time, really, to help you think and to ponder and reflect and be open to God nudging you in the right direction, right? To help you prepare for the journey. So I question you, I ask you right now, what big decision are you facing in which you need to get your group on before taking your first or your next step? What big decision are you facing? Well, let's get back into Esther. This is, we're going to continue with chapter 5 now. We're going to do the first 5 verses, only part of verse 5. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." What a tense moment this must have been for Esther. Did you notice how wisely Esther acted? She took time to prepare, to look her best, and to look her part. She did what she could. Remember, King Xerxes, it was important to King Xerxes to have a beautiful queen. So she didn't show up with her hair up in curlers, wearing her pink fuzzy slippers and in her lounge clothes, did she? No, she put on her royal robes. She made herself presentable, and she showed, even though she had been fasting, she didn't look all gaunt and starved, did she? She didn't act like she was going to faint from hunger or thirst. She showed up looking her best, queenly self. And she invited the king to a banquet. Banquets were the kind of Xerxes thing. Matter of fact, thus far in the book of Esther, that we've had 5 banquets already. So Esther's playing on something that the king he's already into. He would be favorable towards going to a banquet. He likes banquets. And we learn from Esther that spiritual acts are not a reason to skip properly preparing for the journey. I don't know what journey you're about to take or you're already on, but just remember, spiritual acts like fasting it's not a reason to not properly prepare yourself. See, not only does Esther invite the king, but she invites his most trusted advisor, the guy that he's given his signet ring to. He's given him the authority to make laws, which is a really big deal. We're going to find out in a minute. And John Maxwell, who was a pastor who recognized God was calling him to be a Christian voice in the business community, he wrote a book called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I think I got it right that time. The 21 Laws of Irrefutable Leadership. And the second law of that is the law of influence. It's the law of what? The law of influence. And as we get in here, we see what Esther was doing, right? Esther was trying to influence the king, but she didn't just try to influence the king. She brought along the one who was already the key influencer of the king. So, in a sense, what Esther was doing was she was influencing the influencer. That's a pretty wise thing to do. Let's read on and see what Esther has prepared. We're picking up with the last half of verse 5, and we're going on to verse 8. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now, what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, to grant my petition, and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to a banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." See, now, we don't know why Esther hesitated. She had him there. She could have asked her question then. We don't know why, and we don't want to fill in the blanks. But we can think just a minute about it. Maybe she got cold feet. Right? She might have got cold feet. Or she might have experienced a spiritual nudge from God. See, what Esther was asking the king to do was no small matter. In order for Esther to do this, right, I know. The king says, "Hey, whatever you're going to ask, Esther, it's going to be received with favor. Even up to half of your kingdom I will give you." Now, in this empire, you'll see this several places in the Bible, even half of my kingdom. That doesn't really mean he's going to give half of the kingdom, does it? Just think about yourself a little bit. Have you ever told your BFF, "Hey, I'm there for you, man, whatever you need. I'll do whatever you need," right? Do you really mean that? Do you really mean it? Do you really mean that you'll leap tall buildings in a single bound? Do you really mean you'll run faster than a speeding bullet? Do you really mean you'll pay their bills for the rest of your life? I don't think so. It's a euphemism, whatever you call it. It's a hey, I'm down with it. And if it's reasonable, I'll help you out. I'll take care of it, right? So cold feet, possibly. And it would be understandable if it was true. But let me just go through some of the things that we today may not recognize were such a big deal for Esther, but everyone who read this, who first had this story, would recognize how big a deal this was for Esther to make this request to the king. We already noted that Esther had to break the law even to come into the king's presence. Right? Now, to ask for what she wants, she's going to have to admit to the king that she has been deceiving him. She's been what? She's been deceiving the king for the last 8+ years about her identity, that she was a Jew. She's been hiding that fact. And not only has she been lying to the king, now if you lied to your spouse for 8 years and then you came clean one day, they might forgive you, but do you think it's going to be a wonderful conversation? Probably not. And so we look in here, she's also asking the king to break the law. See, in the Medo-Persian Empire, where Xerxes is king of, it is a law that no king can overturn a law once it has been made. Not one his predecessor has made, and not one he has made. Once a law is made, it can't be undone. And this is why in the Medo-Persian Empire, they had a court position whose responsibility it was to argue with the king before laws were made. Now, I don't know where that guy was. Maybe he was on vacation. Maybe he had a flat hoof on his horse or his camel, whatever, before the meeting when Haman got the king to authorize the killing of a certain people. I don't know why that didn't happen that day. But the court position in the Medo-Persian Empire, the adversary to the king, whose job was to argue with the king, the title of that position was called Satan. He was the Satan. Now, if you say that real fast in English, what do you get? Satan in our language, don't you? And what did Jesus call Satan? He called him the adversary. So now you know where we get our term Satan. And folks, not only this, he would have to be overturning his own law, which would weaken his legacy as a king, right? But she also has to tell the king that he has been deceived by his most trusted, noble advisor, Haman. He allowed Haman to make a law in his name that was really, now he realizes, really screwed up. I mean, what he's done is he's given somebody permission to come into the palace and murder the queen. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. The king realizes, he's going to realize at what a vulnerable position he's placed himself in now. And how do you think the king's ego is going to hold up when he finds out he's been deceived by his queen and he's been betrayed by his most trusted nobility, and he's faced with having to break a long-standing law and Luke is like, probably not very well. So when Esther asks the king again, when the king asks her again, what do you want? Well, yeah, maybe she gets cold feet. Or perhaps God gave her a spiritual nudge to say, hey, wait a minute, Esther, not yet. The timing is not right. The text offers us no clue as to why she delays. So it must not be important to us to know why. What is important is that she did delay. And in our lives, we can look at this and go, what seems like a no, not yet, wait, may be our invisible but invincible God, influencing others to act for good. It may be God working behind the scenes somewhere else to get someone to do something, to set up what's going to be for the kingdom good, so that you can work with God to bring about that good. Now, we'll share next week just what God is going to do and how all that's going to play out. But for now, let's learn something from Haman. We're picking up at the 9th verse now, and we're going to finish chapter 5. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to this banquet and enjoy yourself. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Folks, we're learning something from Haman here too. We don't just learn from the good guys. Sometimes we learn from the bad guys. Sometimes you learn what to do. Sometimes you learn what not to do. And here's what you don't do. Don't give your enemy a key to your chain locker. See, every time Haman sees Mordecai, Mordecai's attitude is yanking on Haman's chain. He's just yanking on him, yanking on him. Our Easter message series is going to help us deal with some of these chains in our lives, some of these chains that are holding us back. It's going to help us break free from these things that are keeping us in bondage. The series is called Breaking My Chains. And we're going to talk about unleashing the grave-robbing resurrection power against fear, doubt, failure, and concerns in the world. Make plans now to be present starting on Easter and going for the next 5 weeks. Now, you've heard the cultural proverb that says this, never let them see you sweat. Or its counterpart version is don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Well, don't sweat it. Folks, trust God to to do what? Work with you to bring about good. Whatever you're facing, whatever's going on in your life, it may not feel good. It may be putting you down. I know I got some things in my life that are just weighing me down, and I don't understand what's going on, and I'm praying and I'm hoping, but I'm still in there working with God. Working with God to bring about good. I want you to hear these wise words from Charles Spurgeon. I've paraphrased them just a bit, but the principle is still there, still his thought. While you may not always be able to see God's hand at work, you can always trust God's heart. Let's read that Romans 8:28 passage again. This is Romans 8:28 from the Revised Standard Version. We know that in everything God works for good. with those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. I hope that you'll memorize that verse and use it in your life and equip others to look in their life to see how they can work with God to bring about kingdom good. See, when it seems like no one cares about you, see, when no one sees you and no one cares about you, remember, God does both. You are not alone. So do or do not take the first step or the next step on your journey of faith. But there is no such thing as try. You either do or you don't. Do you get that? Do you get that reflection? What I'd like you to do now is to take the next 4 to 5 minutes. We're going to have our music team come up, and they're going to do a special performance. Now, in the video, that portion will be cut out. What I'm hoping that you will do, if you're watching this video, is go to a video channel and search for the song Alone, A-L-O-N-E, by Holland. And just play that song. And as you're playing that song, I want you to think about this. I want you to reflect or think or to ponder on what we individually and we as a group are standing for. What is it that we're standing for? What is it that we've made a decision on, that we've decided on? What is it that we've charted a course that we may feel like we're all alone on? And we may have some fear or some doubt or some concerns in the Word. We may have failed over and over again, and we're looking for help on it. What is it? I'll be back after the song. What a beautiful song and powerful words, a time of reflection. So what are you standing for in your life? What are you journeying towards? Remember this. Easter is coming. All praise, glory, and honor now and forevermore.